Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going over this little optic that you see in my hands that you guys saw in the intro. This is the TA11. It is a fixed 3.5 power magnified optic. Of course, it's in the Trijicon ACOG line, and ACOGs are known as some of the most durable optics out there on the planet. They have a reputation that they have earned over, probably what, 20 or 30 years of military service here for the United States and many other countries around the world. Very durable, very, very clear glass. And this one here, the TA11, is one that a lot of people say is the best all-around ACOG. So I suppose we'll tackle that here a little bit later on in the review. But what we're going to do first is let the dogs take a look at it, make sure it gets their seal of approval, come back in, go over the details of this particular optic, the reticle on this particular optic, and at the end, we'll go over what I think of it overall. Time for the details of the optic itself. First off, we want to mention that it does come with this mount right here. This is the TA51 mount. It's the standard mount for almost all ACOGs. It's a good mount in terms of functionality. It has some drawbacks. Number one, in my opinion, is weight compared to some of the aftermarket mounts out there on the market. It's definitely a little bit heavier than those, and additionally, it can come loose under heavy periods of firing. So oftentimes you'll see folks in the military will paint mark them to make sure their screws aren't coming out, but I do recommend, if you're going to use the factory mount, to just go ahead and throw a little bit of blue Loctite on the actual screws here, as well as the screws on the underside of the optic here. So that's just me throwing that out there. You can do purple as well if you're afraid of the blue, but either one of those should lock it down pretty securely. I'm sure a lot of you guys are wondering about the color of this ACOG. Now, this one here has the nickel boron finish on there. They're also available, of course, in the traditional black ACOG finish, and then also the flat dark earth finish. They make limited runs of those, but the ones you'll see the most, of course, are going to be the black. All of them are going to be extremely corrosion resistant, but in terms of like the extreme edge of corrosion resistance, if you will, the nickel boron ones like we have here are going to probably give you the most, extreme resistance. Like I said, that said, I kind of just got it because I think it looks cool. Let's be real, right? I like it. I like the color. And if you don't care about, the signature of your rifle or something like that, if it's hunting or home defense type optic, then I think it's just a cool way to go. Now, some other things about it, the actual details of it, of course, this one is a tritium and fiber optic illuminated ACOG. There are other ones that are just battery operated, and there are others that are just tritium operated. So we have our fiber optic rod here running down the top of the optic. That's going to be collecting light. That light is transmitted into the reticle, making it brighter or not as bright depending on the lighting conditions. So that's one of the pros and cons of a lot of ACOGs. Number one, it gives you a nice bright reticle if you're trying to pick it up fast in a bright sunny day, which is really good. The downside of it is that theoretically and in reality as well, you can get some blooming. If it's really, really bright days, you'll see a lot of times folks will actually tape this over to mitigate any sort of blooming. Now, my experience, the green that we have here does bloom less than the red, but they all can have it. So if you want to fix it, like I said, a little bit of tape and you're fixed. If you don't and you want to just run it like I've been doing, I really don't have a problem with it. It seems to work. And unless you're trying to shoot very small holes in paper at 100 yards, it's really not too much of an issue in my opinion, because at distance, of course, the reticle is going to have non-illuminated subtensions, which we'll get into a little bit later in the review. But moving on with the actual optic itself. The tritium in there that's going to power it in low light is, I believe, rated to last 12 years. I have a couple ACOGs that are about that old, and they're kind of dying out now. But of course, it is still usable in most conditions because it has an etched reticle. So those of you guys that have watched any of my home defense videos, you guys know that I'm a big fan of etched reticles if you're going to get something magnified, because it's probably the least likely thing that could fail on an optic if it's etched in there. And of course, this being a prism style optic, that is the case. ACOGs, of course, are fully submergible, and a lot of military units that do underwater operations do use them for that reason. They hold up really well being submerged. For those of us who are civilians out there hunting, You're not going to have any issues with rain or anything like that that you may come in contact with. Part of that, of course, is that it's very well sealed up, both in the lenses, the purging, and everything here, like the little windage and elevation turrets are sealed as can be. You have your rubber O-rings all the way around them, and it locks up nice and tight. Now, one thing that's different on this ACOG versus some of the others is the actual click adjustments. A lot of ACOGs are half-inch clicks. This one here is actually a third. To move the reticle 1 inch at 100 yards, you have to actually click 3 clicks on your windage and elevation. So that's just something that's a little bit different on this one than some of the others, but the clicks are very solid, audible and tactile, just like you'd expect from an ACOG. And for anybody who's used any of the new ones, these ones here are excellent, the new turrets. So some of the old ACOGs used to have a little screwdriver that you'd have to use to adjust it, but these ones are all toolless, which I really like on the new ACOGs. Time to get into the reticle itself. So here we have the chevron reticle, and I should just point out that I generally, when picking ACOGs, prefer the chevron option if I have it. But with the TA11, you have a ton of different reticle options. So this one here is available with ballistic reticles for 308, 300 blackout, and 223 5.5x, as well as several different barrel lengths and things like that. So this is, for instance, the TA11, one of these models, is what the Marine Corps uses on their SAW rifles. So that one, of course, has a specific reticle calibrated for that barrel length and so on and so forth. But the point is, there are a bunch of them out there with donuts, with chevrons, with all different types of reticles. But we're going to go with this one here, which is the chevron, which is the one I chose, and which is the one I typically choose because it's kind of my preference. So first and foremost, the reticle is designed there to be zeroed at 100 yards at the point of the chevron. So right at the top there. This particular one is calibrated for M193 and a 16-inch barrel. That said, people get really caught up in what it's actually calibrated for and how it'll perform in real life. If you run the numbers through a ballistic calculator, I'll roll in a picture here of an example. They're going to be really close, generally speaking, out to 600 yards with just about any load you're going to put through it. But that is what this one is calibrated for. And the outer edges of the chevron there are 19 inches at 300 yards. So basically what that's doing is giving you a ranging capability of either a person standing, walking towards you, or somebody in the prone at the outer edge of the shoulder. A way to estimate the distance that they are away from you is to sort of line it up here on these hashtags and the chevron. So again, at the chevron, the width of it is 19 inches at 300 yards, and if you move down to 400, the width of that hash mark is 19 inches at 400 yards, and you can see there's another one there at 500 yards, 600 yards, and so on. And what I've mentioned earlier was that some people get really consumed with the washout or blooming effect that you can see on ACOGs in really bright days. But if you go down to basically just below 400, so say you're shooting at distance, and I have shot this one here out past 600 yards, when you're shooting at distance, the blooming doesn't really matter because you're holding in an area that's not illuminated either way. So the only area that's illuminated is the part that you see with color here. So the rest of it is just going to be a standard etched reticle, which does allow for a little bit better precision on bright sunny days with a bright background. So that is basically how the reticle works. It gives you the ability to range estimate at various distances, and in my opinion, in my experience with ACOGs, the ballistic drop compensator is pretty much right on. So if you do your part, you'll be able to get combat effective hits at the distances regulated in the reticle. I don't know the actual sales numbers, but I would venture that the TA11 is probably the #2 selling ACOG, and I'm for sure that the TA31 is the #1 selling ACOG. So these ones here are the fixed 4-power, and really they're what you see out there pretty much everywhere you go. When you see a picture of an ACOG, if you Google it, you're going to see the TA31 because that has become the standard optic, at least the RCO version of it for the United States Marine Corps. And most of the U.S. Army, if they're using ACOGs, are going to use the TA31 variant, again, the RCO version for the Army. Now, that said, I personally have been deployed with units that run the TA11. I was in a little logistical support area a few years back with a bunch of 82nd Airborne dudes, and they were all running the TA11. So the TA11 is out there in military service. You absolutely will see it. But by far and away, the TA31 is a more common one, and that's, you know, for military and civilian sales. So let's kind of get into a quick comparison, because I know if not, the questions will come up. So first and foremost, you notice a huge size difference. Now, size difference, yes, it is there. So the TA31 is a very compact little optic, but in terms of weight, the TA31, again, without mount, so we're just going to take the mount out of it, comes in at 9.9 ounces, whereas the TA11 up here is 14 ounces on the dot on my scale. So basically, you're 4 more ounces you're throwing on there. Now, a couple pros and cons to how it actually looks when you're looking through it. With the TA31, one thing that people really like about it is that it has a really wide field of view. So at 100 yards, when you look into the TA31, you're going to be able to see edge to edge on your optic a 36-foot area. So for scanning and things like that, it is really nice. With the TA11 here, it goes down to 29. So not too much of a reduction, but it is a little bit of a reduction. But what you gain with the TA11, which a lot of people really like, myself included, is a little bit better eye relief. So the eye relief here on the TA11 down bottom, the 4-power is one of the biggest complaints about it, and it's right at 1.5 inches. So basically, you have to have this lens here, basically right above your charging handle on an AR-15, let's say, and shoot nose to charging handle to get the proper eye relief. Whereas with your TA11, you have a little bit of extra room. So eye relief, at least Trijicon lists it anyway at 2.4 inches from the back of the optic to get the proper eye relief. I've found you can probably be a little bit more, it's a little bit more forgiving than that, but you do get a good bit more eye relief with the TA11. So that's one of the things people like about it. But like I said, their weight trade-off is there, and also the trade-off in terms of field of view. Pros and cons to each. Both are designed to work with a bend-in aiming concept. So for fast-up shooting, the field of view really shouldn't matter at all if you're shooting with both eyes open. But again, just wanted to point that out because I know people will ask if I didn't cover it. We've hit most of the details of the optics so far. A few things to add. Number one, this came in for test and evaluation from Optics Planet, so definitely want to put a big thank you out to those folks over there. And of course, in the bottom of your screen there, we do have a Mr. Guns and Gear 5% discount code for all the viewers, which I do appreciate. We'll put a link down to this optic down below in the comment section as well. But that brings up the point of price, right? So ACOGs, one of the big downsides of them for a lot of folks is always price. They're excellent optics, like I talked about. They're extremely rugged. They have fantastic glass. Really, ACOG glass is as good as anything I've ever looked through, and I've looked through some really, really expensive scopes in my day, and price point shows it. So this one here over at Optics Planet right now comes in, I think, at $1,300. Of course, you add the discount code in, you can get it for a little bit less, but it's not cheap. And ACOGs just generally aren't cheap. It's kind of what it is. That's going to sort of price it out of the market for a lot of folks. But some folks who have used them in particular tend to say that they're worth it, in my opinion. You know, worth is subjective depending on what you can afford and how much you prioritize something. But I do think ACOGs, for what you get, offer a good value. If you want something that is just absolutely bomb-proof, there's really not a whole lot of optics that can compete with the ACOGs. They do an extremely good job in that. Of course, if you search around the forums, you can see many stories of folks using these getting blown up. I know there's a story of a Marine taking a actual AK round right to the optic in the side of the housing, and it still worked perfectly. It didn't even lose zero. So in terms of durability, they're about as good as it gets. So that is the optic overall. Now, which one should you guys go with? Should you get the TA11? Should you get the TA31? Should you get a different one out there? Some of the 1.5 powers, which are a little bit smaller and lighter. Who knows, right? But that's why we do these videos. I definitely like this one for an intermediate, sort of all-around type of ACOG for sure. I like the extra eye relief that we talked about. I personally don't mind the smaller field of view because I think the added eye relief makes up for it, particularly if you shoot with both eyes open like I talked about. I don't really notice it because I do shoot with both eyes open, so to me it sort of kind of looks the same. But that is pretty much the review. If you guys have any questions about this ACOG or anything else we talk about here in this video, you can always post down below in the comment section. You can also post over at my Facebook page as always. That is generally the best way to get in touch with me. I see more of those comments than I do here on YouTube these days. So if you guys have a question that you want answered or something like that, Facebook is definitely the best way to get in touch with me these days. But as always, thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. If you're not subscribed, you found this through a search and you like what you see, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. For those of you guys that are subscribed, make sure you're liking and sharing and all of that stuff, and we'll see you guys in the next video.